All right. So I don't know if I've been live this whole time. I'm not sure what I got going on. I got a couple different pieces going here. So I'm streaming from my YOLO box. So I'm thinking I might have two different live streams going. This is going to be interesting. Ooh-wee. But I'm Gary B for those who are just joining us. And if this didn't work out right, I'll just upload the recording or something like that. But we're talking about the GH5 being the best camera for your ministry. And so I've been streaming, thinking I've been streaming live on my YOLO box, and I'm not sure where that might be going. Let's see. And so, yeah, it's there, but I don't know. Let me check YouTube real quick. Let's see what we got, because I wonder if I got two live streams going at the same time. Let's see. Okay. So it just started. All right. That's cool. But welcome for those who just joined us. My name is Gary B, and we're talking about the GH5, but we also talked about some things for media ministry. So let me go back, and that's just my error. First of all, welcome to Media Ministry Monday, which is great. And I want to talk to you about questions to consider as a media volunteer, media leader, pastor, whatever it may be. And some of those questions include the following. What's the vision for your media team, right? What are the most important traits of a good media ministry team member? How can you save money this year? I know we don't typically do that as a media team member. We usually look into ways to spend money, invest in new equipment and new technology, new software. But how can you save money, right? Can you get involved in a program like FreeShow instead of paying for a program that you pay monthly for or pay a lump sum for, and still get the equivalent output, the equivalent experience, if not better, using a free program like FreeShow? Can you invest in getting used gear instead of buying brand new cameras or brand new computers? We were talking earlier about making sure that you can get something that's like new, but finding it refurbished, like on Apple's website. I know I like to use Apple computers because they're just more reliable for me, but you might choose to go to the Apple website and get a refurbished computer, and what I've found is that they're just as good as a new because they come with the same warranty, and they're just cheaper. They just are less expensive, which is great. They're refurbished, so they're pretty much even better to me than buying brand new because they've been checked over more than once. All right. Let's see here. How can you cross-train your volunteers, right? Or cross-train more volunteers to where if someone does call in or someone's not available, excuse me, how can you make sure that the team doesn't have that gap and somebody can help fill in their shoes, whether it's a backup person or just someone doing double duty to help out to where they're doing the live stream, but they're also working with the lyrics and the scriptures and things like that. That's a big deal. And it's difficult because when you ask a pastor or a leader, what are some of the most important traits? I believe one of the first things they're going to say is someone who's reliable, someone who's consistent, who's faithful. And I think we all want that. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, what if someone is unable to make it? What are we going to do? And that's where you have to have that cross-training happen to where you can help equip people to do more than one thing, even though it's outside of their comfort zone. They don't have to be a full expert at it, but they have to have some adequate understanding of how it works, right? And so cross-training is helpful, right? And you can do that this year. Think about ways you can implement that. Maybe it's one meeting per month or one meeting per quarter with the media team where you guys are discussing things that you don't know about or that you're not familiar with, and trying to practice using those processes and switching up to say, okay, the person that runs the camera today, they're going to be running the soundboard, or the person that runs the soundboard, they're going to be running the scriptures today, and just get a feel for how it works and people sharing tips and tricks that they've learned and picked up over the time they've been in that particular position, right? And then where do you want to grow? Where do you want your team to grow? What do you see as important for this upcoming year? From where you are now, this is February, beginning of February, where do you want the team, where do you want the ministry to go, the media ministry portion to look like come December, right? Come before the next year comes, what do you want to have accomplished? And then thinking about how can you help improve the presentation of the gospel for your ministry? How can you help improve the presentation of the gospel for your ministry is important, all right? And then what training do you need to invest in and why? Because it might be that you don't feel comfortable using a certain type of soundboard, but you need to make sure your team is trained on it so you can have someone come in and train your team, right? Maybe you don't know how to use an ATEM mini switcher, but you want to implement that and include that and integrate it into your setup. You can get somebody to come in and do some training or find some training online on YouTube or something like that. But all these things come to mind, all right? Let's shift gears and talk about the best camera for smallish ministries. And for me, I would say it is the Panasonic GH5. And it came out in 2018, believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe, but I'm recommending that you invest in a camera that is from 2018, all right? So the GH5 is by far, to me, the best camera that you can invest in for a number of reasons. From what I'm talking about, a used GH5. So that means that it is less expensive. You can find them on MPB for less than $600 US, and sometimes even less than that. That's important to understand. And then also they come with great features, right? Every GH5 has unbelievable focus peaking. They've got great features like waveform and things like that that are built in that you will find on a more professional camera, but it's there. You may not know how to use it right away, but it's something that you can grow into, and it will support most any needs. The other thing about GH5s that I like is that they have the microphone jack and a headphone jack built in. A lot of cameras don't have both of those, which is odd, but that's the case, okay? And then for me, they don't overheat. That's important. When you're using a camera for media ministry, the last thing you want is for it to stop working because it's too hot, right? So that means your live stream stops. That means your recording stops. And even if you're showing the cameras in-house, that means they're not projecting anything because the camera needs to cool down. And that is something that you do not want to have happen. So the GH5 will help ensure that doesn't happen. I've used mine for a documentary shoot that I did in Africa, in Kenya, and it worked great. It didn't have any problems, and I use it outside direct sunlight and everything else, never overheated, all right? And then they're very inexpensive. As I said, you can get one for less than $600, which you can't buy a brand new camera for that price that is anywhere near the same specs that you'll find for a GH5. So your ministry may need to save up. But I did make a tip sheet, a camera buying guide for ministry. So you can go to my website, GarryBJr.com, and check that out to find out what and where, right? And then just save up, because there's a lot of other components you want to make sure you think about before you buy any camera, right? So if you're getting a camcorder, or in this case, a camcorder, for example, you're still going to need a tripod. You're still going to need a way to make sure you power it, right? And a lot of them will come with batteries or a battery. Same way with the GH5. It's got great battery life. It'll last upwards of about 2 hours, which is great. And then the other thing about GH5s that I like is that they're easy to customize. And when I say that, it's as simple as holding down any button on the camera for 3 seconds, and it'll ask you, what do you want this button to do now? You can remap it to do something completely different than what the button even says it's for, okay? And that's unbelievable, because there are very few cameras that you can find that do that from any other manufacturer. And this is from Panasonic. They make great cameras that are kind of underrated. Now, the thing that people don't like about the GH5 is that it's a micro 4/3 camera as opposed to a, excuse me, as opposed to a full frame camera. And from my experience in ministry, that is not a downside. That's actually a strength of this camera, because it allows you to get closer shots with a similar lens, right? Or a smaller lens. So if you get a GH5 and you get a 25 millimeter lens, it actually is like buying a 50 millimeter lens, because it actually doubles in terms of the crop factor. So whatever lens you buy, it actually doubles the length of it because the sensor is that much smaller than it is on a full frame camera, which is a good deal when you're in the back of the church. You don't have to buy this huge lens. You can buy one that's, you know, easy to manage, and it still gives you a good distance that you can see close-up shots and things like that. And then the thing about the GH5 that a lot of people don't know and or overlook, because most cameras don't have, is it has a full-size HDMI. And this is important because when you have a full-size HDMI, you have a much more robust connection to connect to your ATEM switchers, or to connect to whatever, to your computer. Even if you're going to use your computer and connect it to there with a capture card, it is much more reliable in the way that you can run that camera compared to one that has a mini HDMI or micro HDMI. So that's a big deal. The other thing is cheaper lenses. So we talked about it being micro four thirds. That's another benefit of it being micro four thirds, is that the lenses are smaller, but they extend further, right? So they have greater distance that they can reach in terms of millimeters of the actual focal length, but they also are cheaper, right? So they're smaller and they're less expensive. And so when we talk about ways that your ministry can save money, this is one of the reasons why I recommend this camera, all right? And then let's say you've already got cameras and or lenses that are interchangeable. So you may have Canon lenses, right? Or Nikon or Sony lenses. You literally can adapt those lenses to your GH5, right? You can buy an adapter and connect that to your GH5 and then connect your lens to it, and it'll work just fine, all right? Photos and videos are available using a GH5 camera, and you can use it to take great pictures. I've used it for years as a photographer and a videographer, so it does a great job of getting good, clear pictures that you can edit and have all this great dynamic range and everything else, but it also is excellent for video, all right? And this is one of the few cameras that you can say that about because it doesn't have that recording limit, right? So some cameras, they may be great for photo, but with that, they can shoot video. The downside is when they shoot video, they actually stop at a 29 minutes and 59 second mark to where it just stops recording, and you have to start it back up if you want to keep recording. And so if you want to use a GH5 camera, you don't have to worry about that. It can record for 2 hours straight, 3 hours straight, 5 hours straight, as long as you've got power to it and you've got a card that can hold that long of a video, it'll record nonstop. Whereas a lot of mirrorless cameras don't do that, right? From Sony, Nikon, Canon, Fuji, a lot of their cameras are going to have a recording limit of 30 minutes, and it'll just stop and start back up when you press the button to start recording again, okay? Now, if you're not recording, which is fine, if you're not going to be recording completely, you're just going to be streaming it and connecting it to an ATEM switch or something like that, may not be that big of a deal. But the thing you got to be considerate of is if you buy a mirrorless camera, some of them do not allow you to output clean HDMI to like an ATEM switcher or to your computer, for example, using the HDMI. So you want to be mindful of that, but you don't have to worry about that with the GH5. It does great with sending out a clean HDMI signal from the HDMI port. All right. I talked about this a little bit earlier. It has great battery life. The GH5 has unbelievable battery life. It'll last for a good 2 hours with just one battery. And so when I did that documentary in Kenya, I was just carrying around batteries because I had to be remote. I couldn't use like a cord to connect it to power. We were literally on the move constantly. And then some people will rig it up and they'll actually use like a bigger battery and connect that like a V-mount battery or something like that. You can do that. But to me, the smaller batteries are more convenient if you're on the go. Now, if you got it rigged up at your church, I wouldn't even use a battery at all. I would just use an adapter that allows you to connect to a wall. But it looks like I call it a dummy battery. So you plug it into the battery slot and it has a cord connected to it, and that cord connects and plugs in to a power slot, right? To a plug in the wall, all right? The other thing about the GH5 that I love is that it has 2 card slots. So it has 2 card slots to where you can put in the same card twice, right? So you can put 1 card in slot 1 and 1 card in slot 2, and you can use that to record a backup real time. And for a ministry, that's important. So you don't want to miss out or lose the message because maybe the internet dropped out, or maybe something happened to the switcher, or something happened to the computer. And so now your live stream is messed up, but you never were recording. That's a problem. So you always want to record your service, even if you don't need the recording. I would record it into your camcorder if you've got one. Record it into your, your cinema camera if you got that. Record it into your mirrorless camera if you got that, just as a backup. But if you actually use those recordings, you still want to have a backup of that as well. And so with the GH5, with those 2 card slots, you can record to both at the same time. And a lot of mirrorless cameras, as I say again, do not allow you to do that. They don't allow you to record a backup while you're recording the original at the same time. And the GH5 does let you do that. Now, another option with it is if let's say you're sending the signal to an ATEM that actually is recording to a hard drive. So the hard drive is going to have the main file, and then the SD card is the backup. You can set the SD card slots on your GH5 to not record together at the same time, but to record in relay. So once one is full, it'll just automatically start recording to the next card. And that's something that is important, and it'll just keep that backup. You don't have to worry about running out of card space. And if you do run out of card space, it'll start to the next card. You can take out the first card and swap in a new one while it's recording to the second card, okay? And that's something that's very unique to the GH5 that I love, okay? The biggest slight against the GH5 has been the autofocus when it comes to history. So you start looking at videos, people love the GH5, video makers, content creators, cinematographers, they love it. Cinematographers don't really care about autofocus because they're manually focusing anyway, which is what I would recommend, which is how I always use my GH5. But what you don't know is for these videos, I've always used the autofocus. So right now I'm using the GH5 and it's autofocused on my eye and it's staying connected to my eye the whole time. And it's perfect for that. So it has good enough autofocus is what I call it. It's good enough. It's not a detriment, especially for media ministry, because content creators are different. They're going back and forth in front of the camera. They're walking away from the camera far distances and things like that. But the way focus works is it works on a plane, okay? Kind of like I think about football. I love watching NFL football. And so American football, they get across the touchdown line. And as long as they cross that plane, it counts as a touchdown. Well, cameras and lenses, cameras with lenses especially, their focal range works like that. And that's important because as long as you stay in the same space, even if you walk across that way or walk across this way, you're still in the same focal plane. So if you're using manual focus and you never change it, once you set the focus to the preacher, the teacher, or the worship leader, whoever it is on stage, as long as they don't go back and forth on the stage, the focal plane will never change. So you don't ever have to worry about using autofocus if you don't want to, all right? Let's see here. We got a brother, Juan Morales. How you doing, Juan? Yes, all is well. I just got done working out, so I'm a bit winded, but I'm good. I'm good. And I appreciate that. You said, I can't thank you enough for all the knowledge. Shout out from Connecticut. Man, Connecticut. We were in Boston in November, I think. My wife was invited to come to Boston. So we were up in your neck of the woods just a while back, a couple of months ago. So yeah, thanks for joining in. And hopefully this is helpful for you. Juan, tell me about your ministry. Are you a pastor? Are you a media volunteer? Tell me about your role and what do you think is one of the things that's most important for a media volunteer or media leader in a ministry, all right? So going back to the focus on the GH5 is the autofocus is very good. It is not as good as some of the newer cameras, but it doesn't need to be, right? It's good enough for any media ministry that I've used it in any setting I've used it in when I need to use autofocus, like in a situation like this, okay? It has great manual focus. So manual focus is something that I recommend anybody do. So when you're looking at bigger ministries and things like that, most of the time what they're using is manual focus. And so that means for some people, it's a push of a button where they're using a button that'll turn the lens to focus. Or some people are just turning the lens, right? They're just touching the lens and turning it from their setup and they got the headphones on talking to the production team or whatever it is. For the bigger churches. For smaller churches, you might just be a person in the back with a tripod and the camera and you just turn it to make sure it's in focus. With the GH5, you can literally turn on a setting that makes it show you when things are in focus. And so I've got mine set to where when things are in focus, when I'm doing manual focus, while I'm turning the ring, everything that turns green means it's in focus. And so I can literally see my focal plane change forward and backwards as I turn the ring back and forth because things are turning green or not turning green, right? They're coming out of becoming green, all right? And so that's something to keep in mind. This one is an important feature, right? This is something that you don't get on many cameras, and the fact that it's a micro four thirds camera allows it to do this better than most any other camera on the market, and that is image stabilization. When I had a Canon camera, I used to own a lot of Canon cameras. I say a lot. It was a lot to me. I had 2 or 3 different Canon cameras in my life, and probably, I guess, in a lifetime, I probably had 4 or 5 different ones. I've had 70Ds, I've had a 7D Mark II, I've had a regular 7D. So 4 different Canon cameras I've used, and I use them for business purposes, for making videos, right? And so autofocus on Canon cameras, I think is really good. Manual focus is very hard because it doesn't show you anything to tell you that anything's in focus. A GH5 does that, but when I also when I had those Canon cameras, I had to buy lenses that had stabilization built in on the lens. And so the camera body, you would connect the lens to it and you would hold the camera and the lens would dictate how smooth the movement and the motion would be, or if it had any jitters or shakes or anything like that, the lens would dictate that because the lens had all the stabilization in it. Well, when it comes to micro four thirds cameras, a lot of them have in-body stabilization. So the body of the camera itself has stabilization in it, all right? And let me see, let me grab a camera real quick. All right, so this is a G85, and this is another camera I would recommend. So this camera itself has stabilization built in with, even, you know, I haven't added a lens, but I don't have to add a lens that has stabilization because the camera itself has stabilization built into it. And that stabilization is literally on the sensor. So the sensor, if I shake the camera, the sensor will still stay steady no matter what, which is important when you're talking about people in your ministry, maybe hand holding the camera and walking up on the stage or standing off to the side and capturing B-roll or a side or second shot. You want to make sure the camera is stable, and Panasonic cameras are best at stabilization in my opinion. And I think that's pretty much widely spread across the industry, that people know that Panasonic stabilization is the best. All right. Another thing about this camera is that it is older, right? So it came out in 2018. I would say the next best thing to getting a GH5, if cost is not an issue, right? For me, cost is always a part of the equation, so I'm not going to say that this is normal, but if cost is not an issue, the next best thing would be an S5 Mark II, right? It's 3 times the cost used, okay? But it is the same feature set that you'll find in the GH5. The S5 Mark II maybe came out maybe 2 or 3 years ago, so it may have came out in 2022, maybe 2021, I can't remember exactly, but it's a full frame camera, and it has, so that means that it's going to cost a bit more. The lenses are a bit more expensive, but it does work better in low light. So if you don't have professional lighting in your ministry, right, then this camera, S5 Mark II, might be better. The GH5 to me is just enough. It's fine in low light, but the S5 Mark II also do give you better photography, right, because it'll give you better background blur and things like that than what you can get with a typical lens or a kit lens with the GH5. All right. Now, what I will say is, in my opinion, if you say, okay, cost is important for me, I would say the next best thing would be a GH6. Okay, so a GH6 is a camera that has a better screen. Let me pull that up real quick. I've got my GH6 here, but it's actually on a monopod. And so the thing I like about the GH6 is the screen tilts out like that. So you can literally just see the screen without ever having to flip it out like you have to on a GH5. So on a GH5, you'd have to flip the screen out and then you would rotate it around to be able to see it. But with the GH6, you don't have to do that. You can literally just pull it straight up and it'll just be up. Okay, so the way that looks is like that. It comes away from the camera. The GH5 is a lot like this camera, to where if you want to tilt the screen up, you'll pull it out, right? And it pulls up, but then you can tilt it, okay? And this is typical. This is how most cameras are made. The GH6 has all the same features as the GH5 pretty much that I've talked about, but the thing about the GH6 is that it does have better stabilization, and it has USB-C charging built in. The GH5, you can't charge it via USB while you're using it, but the GH6 you can, and it still has in-body stabilization, and it still doesn't overheat. It has actually a built-in fan in the camera itself. And so the difference is it's going to cost about twice as much, about 1.5 times as much. So it's like $900 US. If you want to buy one used, anywhere from 1,000 to 900 is where I've been finding them on the MPB website. And I'll put that link, or that, not the link, but the name of it in the chat here, so you can check that out. Now, the other thing about the GH6 is that it does have different card slots. So it has a CF Express card slot and an SD card slot. So it has one of each. They still function like the GH5, to where you can record to them both at the same time. You can make it to where one will record and then it'll roll to the next one when that one is full, and you can switch them out, right? While one is recording, you can take out the one that's not and put in a new version of that card. So when it's done at the bottom on the second slot, it'll roll back up to the first slot and keep going, right? So you can have continuous. It doesn't overheat. Like I said, it runs continuously. It doesn't have a recording limit or anything like that. It does, to me, have better internal preamps for audio. So you can actually connect your soundboard directly to this camera. Okay, so you can connect it directly to the camera using the headphone not the headphone, but the microphone port on it, or you can buy an XLR adapter. All right, and this is something that's sold separately that works with the GH5 and the GH6 and the S5 Mark II. Okay, so the XLR adapter is something that you can use. And let me see if I can pull up one of those real quick. Hold on, just a sec. And I'm just going to go to MPB. And I'm going to let you guys see my screen here. Let's see. So let's share. All right, so I'm going to mirror this one here for now. All right. So you guys can see that. All right, so I'm on mpb.com. And when you're on mpb.com and you go to, so let me turn this, we'll keep that on, okay. If I type in GH5, so it's $569 to $639, and that's they got 7 available right now. If I type in GH6, they got 10 plus available, and they range from $900 to $1,049, right? That's US dollars. So they can be considered fairly expensive cameras because you can't just buy the camera body and act like you can do anything. You still have to have some lens to make this work, all right? So you still have to have extra expenses with it. So that's why I recommend the GH5, because it's so much cheaper. But there's this thing called an XLR, here we go, adapter, DMW XLR1 adapter. And this adapter allows you to connect your GH5 or connect to your GH5 or your GH6 or your S5 Mark II, depending on whatever your budget is. And it ranges used for about $250, $240, and it allows you to connect XLR ports to your camera, right? So remember I said earlier you can connect it directly to your soundboard. You can connect this to the top of the camera. This little thing, it connects to the top of the camera, and then you plug in a full-size XLR cable, which is like the same kind of cable you would use for a microphone. You can use that for this particular camera, and you can plug in 2 different ones if you wanted to. The GH6 allows you to use these 2 spots, and you can still plug in another microphone to the camera, right? To the actual microphone port on the camera, because this is actually connected through the hot shoe. It'll connect to the top there, all right? And so that's what I like about the GH5s. That's what I like about the GH6. And I'm curious about your thoughts. What are your thoughts about getting a camera for your ministry like that, right? So what does that mean for your ministry? If you were to change the cameras that you use, I'm curious what you currently use. I know a lot of people are using camcorders. I know that there's some people using pan tilt zoom cameras, PTZ cameras, and I think those are great. The camcorder is cool because everything's built in all in one, and it works out the box. It comes with a battery. You just charge the battery up, and it'll run. The battery on a camcorder can run maybe 2, 3, and sometimes even longer hours, right? Which is great. It doesn't have to have an extra lens to it because it's all built in. You just put in an SD card. Some of them have 2 SD card slots, which is great. But a lot of them have smaller HDMI ports, not so great, and it's very difficult to get a good quality picture out of a camcorder. Now, if your ministry already has a camera or you just use your phone for pictures, I think a camcorder is a great option just because it's so simple to use. It's so versatile in terms of it just works out the box. The autofocus for a camcorder usually works fine without any problems. The downside is that low light is not going to be as good as a GH5 would, or GH6 for that matter, because the sensors in the GH5 are much bigger than what you'll find in a camcorder, all right? And that just means they can take in more light. So they'll do better in low light, and they'll take pictures, the GH5s and the GH6s will, all right? What other questions do you guys have before we wrap up today for Media Ministry Monday? My goal was to have a conversation and throw out some thoughts. I had a little hiccup with the live stream, so I'm not sure which live stream came up, because my YOLO box says I've been recording for 56 minutes, but YouTube has said I've been recording for only 30 minutes. So forgive me for any confusion or hiccups or anything like that. But the goal is the same. Have conversations that will empower you, to equip you, to improve your ministry, right? So the media team comes alongside and says, okay, how can we play a role to help improve the ministry? Not take over, not be in the way, right? My goal and my expectation is that media should be invisible, right? It should be seamless to the service. It should be seamless to the flow of the ministry. So we don't want to have hiccups with the sound. We don't want to have hiccups with the cameras or the audio or the video or anything like that. The live stream, we want it to flow smoothly. And so, like for me, for example, I'm dealing with this and trying to navigate and make sure, okay, did I mess up the live stream? That can be a problem for the end user, and we don't want that. We don't want our audience to be confused or disturbed or distracted because of us as a part of the media team. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to let you guys go, and I look forward to connecting with you on Friday for Free Show Friday. Continue to look at the videos on YouTube. Ask any questions. We got some questions that have come up that I'll try to release some videos for Q&A Thursday, and put out some new videos to answer some questions that I've seen that have come through from other videos, and we'll go from there. But also, we just released a ATEM Mini connected to FreeShow video. Okay, if you haven't checked it out, make sure to check it out. It walks you through. So if you're considering using an ATEM for your ministry, or you currently are using it, and you're considering or currently use FreeShow, those two can work together for your live stream, to where you literally can send your slides, your shows from your FreeShow, from your computer on FreeShow directly to your ATEM in a seamless way to get the lower thirds that I was using earlier that you saw. And I'm using FreeShow to do all that, right? Connected to an ATEM. So that is a possibility, and that video walks you through step by step how to make that happen, all right? And God bless you guys, and